Hey everybody, this is Autoblog Podcast producer Eric here. I'm just hopping in quickly at the beginning of the episode to let you know that this episode of the Autoblog Podcast is brought to you by the SoFi Daily Podcast. Reaching financial independence starts with having the right information. So every weekday morning, SoFi keeps you up to date with important business news and stock market happenings and how they affect your financial life. So get your money right and search for SoFi, that's SOFI, wherever you get your podcasts. On with the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today on this sunny Tuesday afternoon is senior producer Chris McGraw. He's joining us for the second straight week because I drove a Land Cruiser. And Chris and I kind of have this relationship with Land Cruisers. We like them. So I figured I had to get Chris back on here. You excited to talk some Toyota Land Cruisers, Chris?
I am always excited to talk about Toyota Land Cruisers.
All right. Meanwhile, we'll bring in Joel Stocksdale, our news editor, who has driven a Land Cruiser at some point during his journalism career. But that's not why he's here today. He's going to tell us about 47 different BMW 8 Series he's been driving lately. I'm only half joking. He literally has had 2 or 3 of them. We're going to focus in on the M8 and the 840 I Coupe specifically. Perhaps more interestingly, maybe not, I don't know. This is a little more interesting to me, though. Joel spent some time in the Range Rover Velar, the Autobiography Edition, if I'm getting that correct. We have a first drive up on site. I'm intrigued by the Velar. I have driven it a couple times. I like it. I actually think, and this may be a hot take, I like it better than its platform mate, the Jaguar F-Pace. So it'll be interesting to hear what you guys think. Let's go from there. We will spend... we're going to spend somebody's money. Let's put it that way. We're not going to spend your money this week, but we do have some money to spend. And, oh, by the way, there is a quick news segment that we will sandwich in there on the Mach 1. Joel went to a backgrounder of sorts, and his post is up on site as of this morning. So let's jump right into the Toyota Land Cruiser. This is one of the oldest vehicles on the market, but I think it's also one of the more interesting vehicles on the market, if you will. I spent the last week driving around in one. It was a lot of fun. I feel like it's just such an old school feel. It really just, it just brings back sort of memories of what it's like to drive an old SUV, which maybe isn't quite the feel that Toyota's going for. Mine was the Heritage Edition, so that means you get script Land Cruiser badges, the bronze wheels, and, there's a couple interior touches, which, I think it's cool. I love the badges. The wheels I could kind of, give or take. I'd have to play around with the Land Cruiser, the specs and see which ones I'd actually get. But, it was fun to drive it this weekend. I like having large SUVs like this. I was able to put a lot of things in it. I did I got takeout twice, which in Michigan, now that the stay-at-home order has been lifted, I guess you could get takeout before that, but I was more aggressive in my takeout pickups, if you will. And fun trick, you can do the trunk release, and then the clamshell thing kind of opens, and they put your Thai food or your pizza right in the back, and that's good. What's not so good are the brakes. They are crazy touchy. There's a lot of pedal travel and then a lot of brakes. But in between that point, basically, your heart goes into your throat as you wonder if you're going to hit the car in front of you. By the end of the week, I had things kind of, calibrated, and I knew what I was doing. I mean, you got to drive. There's no autopilot cars, not really. You got to pay attention, especially when you're driving a vehicle like this. But yeah, man, that wasn't so great for the Thai food and the pizza coming home. They got a little smushed, but it was okay. Steering is basically totally numb, but it's also a huge workout because you're turning enormous tires. And I forget exactly how the specs of the steering are, but they're not calibrated for responsiveness. I would say it's trying to steer like a 1920s ocean liner. If I can make a comparison to something I would have no experience in, but it looks really cool. I mean, people still notice it. People look at it like, oh, that's kind of cool. There's a guy at the end of my street who has 2 generations ago Land Cruiser. He actually offered to sell it to me once when my dog stopped and was sort of using his lawn as a restroom. But I've really been getting into it. As an objective journalist, as an editor-in-chief of Autoblog, yeah, this thing's old. There's many ways it falls short. The drive character is not for everyone, but you can put a lot of things in it. It's comfortable. It looks cool. I would argue if you're looking for a large luxury SUV, this is cooler, I think, than some of the BMWs you could get out there. It's definitely different than, say a Tahoe or like a Yukon, which are on everybody's, street corner here in Metro Detroit. I think they're great. I'm glad this thing's still around. That V8 it's not bad once you get going, but it takes a little while to get going. Let's put it that way. Transmission, there's a little bit of, I'd say, gear hunting or hesitation or something going on in there when you're moving around. That being said, I could own a Land Cruiser, I think. I feel like the play would be, don't get the Heritage one. It's not worth the sticker. Maybe don't even get a new one. Get one that's like 2 years old, something like that. Figure out exactly how you, like, what kind of Land Cruiser you want, then work your way back a couple years and go from there. So that's sort of my opening monologue on the Land Cruiser. McGraw, I know you went to an event a couple years ago. No, not even a couple years ago, like last year, right? Where you were able to drive every Land Cruiser there was.
Almost every. No 70 series, unfortunately. The diesel
awesome.
70 series is still on my list, yeah. But pretty much everything else, yeah.
So I guess what's your take? I just drove it. This is like sort of like the muse for talking about it. I do have sort of a post written. I voice recorded it on an email draft, if you will, and then sent it to myself. So I've got like literally like 600 words of me like kind of rambling on this. A post will come at some point. But there's also really no news here. We drove this car. We've driven this car. You've driven this car. I think Joel has driven this car, this SUV. But my question to you is, do you think this still holds up? Does it still feel special, or does it just feel old?
I think, can it be both? Because that's kind of where where I land. I think it feels special, but I think it feels old. I mean, we're talking about an SUV that's like late Bush, early Obama administration era. So that's quite a while ago is when the 200 series came out. I think that the Heritage Edition, though, which is celebrating, the 60th anniversary of the Land Cruiser, is a good send-off for the 200 series. I want to see what's next. I'm definitely with you on the brakes. Like, if you've never experienced nosedive, just get in the Land Cruiser and hit the brakes, and it's a little unreal to be driving a vehicle in 2020 that feels like that. But it is old school. The steering, I totally agree with you there too. It just kind of floats above the road as you're driving it. Incredibly comfortable, very luxurious. It's a lot of money. It's a ton of money. And actually, you said you probably wouldn't get the Heritage Edition. I think I would, just because if you're spending 87 grand, what's another two? I wouldn't get either of them brand new, though. That's definitely for sure. I would definitely buy them, a few years used. It's going to last forever, like all Land Cruisers have. Especially if you live in a state where they don't, salt roads in the winter and rust really isn't an issue. It's going to last forever. And we talked a little bit in the last podcast about the new Defender and how you really like that one, Greg. And I had a question for the group and about between the new Defender, which I think a base Defender starts at around 50, and this Land Cruiser Heritage Edition, which is approaching 90 grand. I think it's 89 and change. Over a 20-year span, do you think the 200 series Land Cruiser or a brand new Land Rover Defender is going to end up costing an owner more. What do you guys think?
Joel, what do you think? You're better at math than I am.
No, I'm not. But that's like barely even a question. I mean, like the Land Cruiser is going to be much more affordable long term, and probably and hold its value better too.
I know when I got back from that trip, which seems like eons ago before, coronavirus and everything.
The before times.
It was just the end of 2019. We didn't know how good 2019 was until it was gone. But when I got back from that trip, I had been looking at 100 series on and off to get as a personal vehicle. And man, they have just shot up in price on the used market. The 100 series, even the 80 series around me, and as well as the 200 series. But it's definitely gonna hold its value. But if you like that big SUV, old school feel, I think the Land Cruiser, especially the Heritage Edition of the 200 series, it's a great way to go. It looks fantastic. I would get mine in black. You can get it in white as well. I like the wheels. Personally, I like the running board delete. I think there's a refrigerator in it. They deleted the third row seat, and there's a roof rack. A few other touches, but I really like that package and the 200 series overall.
I'll say this too: the way the Heritage Edition is set up with a third row delete, I like that. I think you get a lot of space back there. That's kind of nice. I suppose you can always just put the seats down, but it's so large inside that you really don't need that third row unless it's like sort of a personnel carrier type of situation. I mean, it's funny when you do talk about brake dive. Like when I started out in this business, like all the time in our reviews, we talk about, well, there's a lot of dive in the brakes, or, it's like, it's weird through the corners. And I've noticed you don't do that as much now, simply because cars are a little bit more refined. And I'm not that old here, but I mean, like even in 08, 09, 10, I think my actually first press car I was in was back in 05. Cars weren't as good as they are now, and now it's like, wow, when you drive something that's this kind of raw, you notice it compared to like everything else on the road. Really, among the only other vehicles like this are the 4Runner, which has a similarly off-road tuned kind of, just behavior. And yeah, I mean, it's something. I mean, the Lexus counterpart has a better suspension on really both the 4Runner and the Land Cruiser. I'm mixing up my Lexi in my head here. But Joel, you might know this. Land Cruiser, Lexus, sibling.
I think it's the LX
570.
I would have guessed that. I just didn't want to sound like an idiot. So instead, I'll just talk for a minute and sound like an idiot. But in some ways, I almost would rather take the LX because it is a little bit more of an even experience. And I actually like how the LX looks. To me, that's a cool looking vehicle. I think Lexus design is good, but at the end of the day, it's not a Land Cruiser.
Right. Yeah. I like the Lexus a lot as well. In fact, I was one day away from pulling the trigger on an LX 470 a few months back. Didn't end up doing it, but especially if you're just driving around town, it's going to be way more comfortable. I think once you start off-roading, which we're talking about a very, very small percentage of car owners are looking at the LX versus the Land Cruiser and wondering which is better off-road. But I think we had a post a few weeks ago where kind of showed the difference in the approach, departure, and breakover angles of each. So I think the Lexus is a little bit, I think the approach angle especially, the front just kind of interferes there. But I mean, I don't think anybody's really taking their LX off-road, and very few people are taking their Land Cruiser off-road. So I don't know how much that matters.
Yeah, I tell you what, though, the Land Cruiser is great on Michigan's roads, which are essentially like off-roading. I mean, that's where the other side of having a truck tuned that way really comes in your favor. I took, there's a street, I forget where I was going, but it's pretty rough. Let me put it that way. And I was in the Acura NSX, and I was like, whoa, this is a rough road here. And at one point I was actually maneuvering around the manhole covers because it was like the road was open, but they hadn't put the top layer down. So I'm like basically slaloming, trying to get home. And in this thing, I was just like, boom, right over the top, like one hand steering, playing with the radio station. I mean, obviously in a large SUV, that's going to sort of be the vibe anyway. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely good for something when you're doing just kind of cruising. But that's the Land Cruiser. I think we've talked a good amount here. We'll probably start losing people who want to know why you're talking about a vehicle that is two presidential terms old here, at least. Let's move on to a newer SUV, the Velar. Joel, what did you do with it? Your first drive's on the site. Nicely done. Tell us your initial impressions.
Yeah, so first thing, you have to take a really deep breath before you say its full name, because it's long. It's Land Rover Range Rover Velar SVAutobiography Dynamic Edition.
Okay, so we're not going to get that in the headline of the podcast post.
Nope, I barely got any of that into the main headline. I think I actually probably dropped a word here, a word there, here or there in the headline. But it looks great. The Velar is super stylish, and I appreciate that they managed to make it stylish without having to do the like fake coupe body style, a fastback body style. Like, it's still a fairly traditional SUV shape. It's just a very sleek, rakish version of that. And I like the pop out door handles, and this one has more like body painted fender flares and side skirts and things that make it look a little lower and more aggressive. But the absolute highlight of the car is that supercharged V8. It's so good. It's super responsive. Like, even the best turbo engines, they don't respond like the supercharged engine. And it has this like really smooth like wave of power that you get when you get onto the throttle. It's really lovely. But I also have issues with it. And the biggest issue is the brakes are awful.
So we're 2 for 2 so far. We hate the brakes on both vehicles we've talked about.
Yep.
Okay, fair enough. And I don't hate the brakes on the Land Cruiser. They're just challenging. But go on.
Yeah, the brakes in the Land Rover, I would say, are legitimately bad. The brake pedal is super soft, and it really doesn't start engaging until you've pushed in like at least halfway down, and that can be pretty distressing when you've accelerated this like 4,000 plus pound SUV up to speed, and you need to rein it in quickly. It's not good. Even around town, it feels too soft. It's uncomfortable, and it's not fitting for a performance SUV. And I'm not big on the ride and handling either. It does all right, but going through corners, especially if there's like a couple bumps here or there, it gets really kind of wiggly and unsettled, and it doesn't feel like it responds very quickly. Like, you turn it in, you feel like there's kind of a moment before it all shifts its weight over and then goes through the corner. It's not great, and it's kind of an issue when BMW and Mercedes have such like excellent all-around performance SUVs.
That's interesting. I'd agree with you 100% on the driving dynamics. Where I really am sort of taken with the Velar is just how cool it looks. I think it's almost like chopped, if you will, the way you can, just the roof line manages to be also squared off, but also, you know, it's not a coupe, but it's also a very like kind of like just like, you know, chopped, like I said, looking vehicle. I think it looks just so cool. My take is I generally like it better than the F-Pace as far as the appearance, and I really like the F-Pace. We had that long-term one that was purple. Well, actually, it was like a shade of blue, I think, but it was purple for all intents and purposes. My dog went to the vet multiple times in that Jaguar, just random. It was like every time I drove it, she'd get sick and get to luxuriate across the back seat as she came home with her newest gastrointestinal medicines. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? So you again, Joel, you're like not as good as the Germans. I think we all agree. Well, I don't know. I think it looks cool. Where else does this thing fit?
So I when we had the F-Pace in the office for that year, my opinion was that was the best looking SUV on the market, with the Volvo close behind. I think for me, the Velar squeaks into second place behind the F-Pace. I loved that F-Pace with the blackout package and that shade of blue that was like the closest shade of blue to purple there is. But the Velar looks so good, and I have not driven the one that Joel has driven. The last one that I drove was a diesel. But I remember that one being close in price to that F-Pace that we had. I think it was like a grand or two more, and it felt on the inside just so much better. Like I thought it was going to be 10, 15 grand more just based on how it felt while driving it. Maybe not the acceleration with that diesel too much, but that was, that's just a different engine. So as far as like looks and comfort go, I think it looks phenomenal. And I think that the interior is probably one of my favorites, but it does have that Land Rover infotainment system that, you can't really ever seem to love. But that's the case with all JLR stuff.
So I think I'll be interested to see what the path forward is for the Velar. How they, the Autobiography edition basically creates a Velar in the way I would like one. Again, it's expensive. I wonder how they're going to continue to iterate it, what other maybe special editions they'll do. Any final thoughts on your Velar, Joel?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to sell all the ones that they can make because it's extremely fashionable and it has a phenomenal engine. And I think as long as all you really worry about is style and having a fast, cool vehicle, it does the job. I would much prefer an F-Pace SVR. I haven't driven one, but based on the supercharged V6 one that we used to have, it has much better driving dynamics. I would absolutely go with the Jaguar instead. But the Range Rover, I think, is cooler. And I think it does have a nicer interior.
The steering on the Jaguar, I think in particular, is a lot better than on the Land Rover. Or at least it's tuned much better. Let's put it that way. Okay, let's move on to the BMW M8 Convertible and 840i Coupe. A lot of our listeners are just going to be like, Joel drove a lot of 8 Series. Now, you actually had another one in your driveway as well, but just kind of thumbnail impressions of each of these cars, Joel.
Yeah, so had an M8 Competition Convertible the other week, and there's an 840i in my driveway right now, and there's an M8 Coupe coming at some time in the near future. And yeah, this is another vehicle I have mixed feelings about. I'll start with the M8 Convertible. And first off, I'm not entirely sure who it's for. Because it's the M8 competition, so it's the absolute fastest, sportiest version of it. It's got 617 horsepower, 553 pound-feet of torque, and they offer it in a convertible for some reason. And I'm like, well, what person goes out and is like, I want the competition version, but I also need it to have a soft top so that it's heavier and probably not quite as stiff. And I think it's basically just there for somebody that walks into a BMW dealer and is like, I want your most expensive 2-door. Because it starts at about $150,000. And it looks cool and it's very fast, but it's not super engaging. It feels very video gamey. There's just no feel through the steering wheel, and the chassis is super stiff, super composed. You can corner really fast, and because it's all-wheel drive, it launches hard. Every horsepower gets to the road. You're not spinning at all. Everything coming from the engine is converted into forward momentum. But you're just not that involved. And part of why I'm also kind of like, I'm not sure who it's for, is because if you're looking for a sportier, more engaging car, you could buy some kind of Porsche 911 convertible. Or if you're looking for something that's extra luxurious and also fast, you could buy a Mercedes-Benz S-Class convertible, which has a much fancier interior.
I'll say this. I would absolutely go with the 911 over the M8 convertible. To me, there's not much of a comparison there. It seems really like, I don't know. There's a lot of things going on with BMW's design and driving dynamics right now. Some of them good, some of them not so good. So just to kind of step in right there, 911 for me all day.
Yeah, I'd probably lean 911 also. But like if I was looking for something that was just luxurious and comfortable and fast, the Mercedes, I think, is the way to go, because it's got a much fancier interior, much nicer materials, much more interesting design. The BMW is fine, but the issue that I have with almost every BMW is every BMW interior looks a lot like every other BMW. I get that part of that is to have a bit of consistency and to focus on ergonomics, but it's like sitting in it, it doesn't feel as special as like a high-end Mercedes does. And that's a big issue when you're spending $150,000. Porsche can get away with it because their cars are focused on driving. Like, you're not as worried about the interior. You're buying it because of how it drives. But if it doesn't drive as amazingly, you want to make sure that the interior is a good place to be.
Indeed. How about the 840i Coupe? What'd you think of the interior of that?
It's pretty similar. It doesn't have the fancy stereo that this other one had, which had admittedly some pretty cool ambient lighting that shone through the speaker grills and gave it almost kind of a vacuum tube feel. It was kind of a very warm, inviting feel. The 840i doesn't have that because it's actually a fairly base model. It has the turbocharged 6-cylinder engine instead of the V8 and makes under 400 horsepower. And it's rear wheel drive. All the other V8 8 series, they have all wheel drive. And this is slower, but it's still reasonably quick. It certainly isn't like launch you to extremely illegal speeds quick like the M8 is, but it keeps up with traffic pretty well. And I think it actually has a little bit more steering feel than the non-existent feel on the M8. Something I will say, as much as I like convertibles, I definitely would recommend getting the 8 Series in coupe form, because I think it looks a whole lot better. The fastback roof on the coupe just looks so good. And you lose that with the convertible. The convertible has more of a notchback shape, and the cloth top contrasts with the rest of the body. It doesn't have the same flow as the coupe does.
Yeah, I'd buy with that. I mean, or I'd buy that. I'd agree with that. I think, it's also kind of a general, though. I mean, with the exceptions of, a few just absolutely gorgeous convertibles, generally the coupes tend to look a bit just, more elegant, more put together, more, like sort of truer to what the designer intended. Did you do anything fun with your BMW coupes?
I did take the M8 out cruising a little bit on Woodward and got quite a few compliments on it from all sorts of people. Actually, there's a guy in a Mitsubishi Mirage that gave me a thumbs up.
Cool. That is kind of wild. Chris, any thoughts on these two BMWs?
I haven't driven either of them, so I don't have too much to add other than I wholeheartedly agree with you on the coupe over the convertible, just based solely on exterior looks. I think the one thing that sometimes we forget, being, hopefully unbiased people in this industry, is that there are just certain people that love certain car companies. And so now that BMW offers something that, isn't quite at Mercedes level or Porsche level, it's like, might be close enough for some people where they can still sit in their BMW and get close to those, more so with close to the Mercedes than than with the Porsche. But I think that might be who this car is for. But at the same time, it would be nice if BMW would make some ultimate driving machines once again.
Indeed. I think what I'm talking about, like sort of like fantasy garages things, I look at 2-3 generations ago as far as the 3 Series, something that they're actually the values, they're holding steady, but they're also quite attainable if you're willing to take a bunch of miles and then maybe make friends with like your local, mechanic. Car like that to just kind of mess around, throw the golf clubs in, that sort of thing. That's up there with like the old Land Cruiser. I think depending on what I would do with these cars, that's how recent I would get them. For the Land Cruiser, I would probably want to still drive it because it's a large SUV and I don't quite have the luxury of having like a third or fourth car that's just this monster old, vintage SUV. So I wouldn't go that far back. With like a 3 Series, I'd probably go back to about the turn of the century and make it more of just like a toy. Also based on the fact that they're, again, they're quite affordable. So, I think that that's essentially the drive section of the podcast. Joel, more news on the Mach 1 today. Check out the story on autoblog.com. Very interesting as far as how they're positioning the Mach 1. But you went to a backgrounder, I believe it was a socially distant virtual backgrounder. Just tell us what we need to know now about the latest on the Mach 1.
Yeah, so basically the Mustang Mach 1, it revives a nameplate that's been gone for about 17 years, and it's pretty much the most hardcore, track-ready Mustang that you can buy that's not a Shelby. They take the Mustang GT, they throw on the Shelby GT350 intake manifold, retune the engine, and it makes the same 480 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque as the old Bullitt Mustang. But it's not just a Bullitt Mustang. It also picks up some retuned magnetic suspension. It has unique design aspects. It's got a front fascia that's all its own, including a grille with these blanked out fog lights that are a little bit weird just because Ford hasn't offered fog lights in the grille of this current generation Mustang, but now it has a grille that has holes for fog lights, but there aren't fog lights. But it does kind of look neat. And it's got, on the base model, it's got wheels that look a lot like the original Mach 1 wheels, but there's also a handling package that will add a deeper front chin spoiler and wider, more modern looking wheels, and a big rear spoiler with a gurney flap. And it gets a whole bunch of extra cooling stuff, some of them from the GT350 and the GT500. It gets the GT350 transmission if you get it with a manual. If you get it with the 10-speed automatic, it has an upgraded torque converter. And it's got a lot of aero bits. Like it's got a longer, smoother under tray under the body with kind of an integrated like underneath spoiler to add extra downforce. It's basically like so there was like Performance Pack 1 Mustang GT, and then they brought out Performance Pack 2. This is sort of like Performance Pack 3. And it's just like a level below the GT350.
So Performance Pack 3 with more marketing behind it, essentially?
Yeah, it's got Mach 1 badges and stripes.
I'm excited. I remember I've liked both of the Mach 1 generations. A guy down the street from me has one. It's got that V8 in it. I want to say 4.6 liters. It really rumbles. So to me, the Mach 1 in some ways is, if I could go there, it's almost more like the lesser known of all the different Mustangs. I think the Shelbys are very well known. Bullitt definitely has its followings. There's a lot of different Mustangs. Let's put it that way. Mach 1, I feel like can get lost in the shuffle a little bit, but I'm excited to drive it. Chris, I know you've got some strong feelings about generally all things Ford, but how are you feeling about this Mach 1?
I like it a lot. If I was to buy a Mustang, I'd probably get a GT350 myself. But if we're moving to the non-Shelby Mustangs, I always was a Bullet guy. Went on the launch a few years ago. Really enjoyed driving that. But when I first saw this come out, I sent a text to my dad, and who is a Mustang guy, and I was like, I think this is the one that you need to buy. I really like the looks. I agree that the fog light, like the empty fog light things in the grill, are a little weird, but I'm sure that the aftermarket will take care of that for us. And I think it looks really sharp. I think I would go with kind of the old school wheels.
Same.
But I think it looks great, and from what it sounds like, it performs great. I'm not going to say right now, since I haven't driven it, that it has taken over the Bullet for what I would get if I was buying a non-Shelby Mustang, but I can imagine that will be the case after I get out of the driver's seat of one.
It really seems like Ford has made a lot of news surrounding the Mustang in the last couple of years. And anecdotally, it just feels like Camaro has been a little bit quieter. Just off the top of my head, I can think of 2 or 3 different things that they've done with the Mustang, even including the Mach-E, the electric. I feel like, now's probably the time to get a little more Camaro news out there. Just a random thought. And then Challenger, it doesn't really matter just because that car's old, but they sell a lot of them for what it is. And, to me, it's almost its own thing, just because if you want like the bigger, almost, Grand Coupe or whatever you would call that, that's different. It's going to handle different and drive different than the Ford and the Chevy. Anything else we need to know about the Mach 1 there, Joel?
I think we covered the highlights on it. I will admit, I'm kind of surprised at, I get special editions will sell, and I mean, the Mach 1 is definitely going to sell, but in some ways, I almost feel like this sort of undercuts the performance package 2 a little bit, since that doesn't really have any kind of graphics or special edition specialness to go to it. It kind of seems like if you're going to buy performance package 2, maybe just spring for the Mach 1 and have a more unique car with a few more extra performance goodies. And I mean, Ford has really kind of sliced the Mustang lineup pretty thin, because you've got your regular EcoBoost, you've got EcoBoost High Performance, you've got Mustang GT Performance Package 1, Performance Package 2, Mach 1, GT350, and then GT500. That's a lot of models. But at the same time, I mean, Dodge has been doing that for a long time with the Challenger. It gets special editions seemingly, 4 or 5 times a year.
Based entirely on the paint color, it seems like sometimes.
Yeah, and like you said, it seems like Chevy could probably learn a thing or two, because Chevy does have special versions of the Camaro. It's got the 1LE performance models, but that's kind of it. They haven't leaned into retro special editions as much as its competition. And it seems like they should be able to do more kind of retro special editions.
The Z28 was really, really great, but that was already 5 or 6 years ago now.
Yeah, I remember.
And I feel like that's the last time that I've been excited about really excited about a Camaro in the same way.
We were at the New York Auto Show, probably at least you and I, McGraw. I'm not sure if you were at Autoblog yet, Joel, which shows you how long this has been. And I remember seeing this car. I think it debuted. It may have been or it might have just been the second showing. But yeah, I mean, and the other thing too is maybe once we get past automakers come back from the coronavirus shutdown, there's some of these things that we might have seen either at this year's New York show or the Detroit show that should have been taking place the last couple of weeks. We might have seen some of these things, but I guess we'll see going forward. All right, should we spend some money?
Yeah.
I think what we should do is actually already hear about the money Joel spent. So generally in Spend My Money, we take a reader question and try to solve, a car buying problem for them. This time, Joel just bought a Volkswagen Beetle. It's, I guess it's a dream car, right, for you? And you don't have to give me the price if you don't want to, but tell us how you went through this spending your money process, Joel.
Yeah, so I bought a 2013 Volkswagen Beetle with the 2-liter turbo engine and a 6-speed manual. And it is in some ways sort of a dream car. I mean, like, it's not like a dream car like I would never be able to fulfill. It's obviously affordable and I bought one. But basically, ever since I was a kid, I've really liked Beetles. Like, The Love Bug was my favorite movie as a kid, and it's still pretty high up there as an adult. And, like, one of the issues, though, as much as I liked Beetles, I also liked kind of more modern performance vehicles. And certainly the late 90s to early 2000s Beetle never quite lived up to my standards for performance. I actually test drove a Beetle Turbo S at a dealer a few years ago that came up with low miles, and it didn't quite do it for me. But this generation, with the 2-liter turbo, it was pretty much the same engine as what you would find in a VW GTI or Jetta GLI. So 210 horsepower and had the same 6-speed manual gearbox. And I like the way this generation looked, and they're pretty affordable. I found one with low mileage and well equipped, had a sunroof, had the upgraded stereo, had keyless entry, and heated seats. And yeah, it drives well, and it also kind of fits sort of what I was looking for in a car. I realized that I've gone a little bit soft since I've been driving nicer cars the last few years working at Autoblog. And my 2 existing cars, a Miata and a Civic Si, were kind of stiff and kind of noisy. And the Beetle was quite a bit softer and quieter, but still had good power and good potential for being modified because it's basically a GTI underneath. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
What, curious how you went about buying it. I know, things are easing up a little bit in Michigan. There's no vaccine, I guess, as far as the coronavirus, but were there any unique challenges you faced trying to get this car or test drive it or research it, anything like that?
Yeah, so I was able to still look for car listings pretty easily because I was able to hop online and check things out. Test driving was a little bit concerning, but I was able to go to the dealer and basically just, for the most part, interact with them outside and keep my distance. And when I drove the car, I was able to just drive it alone, which was actually really, really nice because then you don't have this dealer that's kind of pushing you to go back to the dealer early. I was able to actually go out, drive it really thoroughly, drive it hard, make sure that nothing went wrong with it during my test drive, check it for any leaks or anything. It was actually really, really nice that I didn't have a dealer in the car with me telling me where I needed to go and when we needed to go back to the dealer. That was actually a huge benefit. Yeah, other than that, it was actually pretty similar to, if you bought a car anyway. I did have to make an appointment, though. At the time, they weren't open for just walking in, asking to test drive a car. You had to make an appointment to show up and look at a specific car.
Cool. Now you, I believe, are test driving a vintage Beetle as well.
Yeah, there is a 64 Beetle coming this week, and you will be hearing from me about what a difference 50 years makes.
That sounds good. I can't wait to read that. And since Spend My Money is generally a question, and then we give an answer, this time we've already given the answer. To whom would you recommend this car? If they were writing in, what would the question be? I'm looking for this, this, and this, and then the answer is Beetle. Who would you, I guess, to really kind of do a riddle here, what would be the question that this is the answer to?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
If I could hop in here, just based on our conversations, Joel, you and I were talking about this vehicle before the podcast, before we knew that we'd be talking about it and Spend My Money. I was asking you how it was, and you said it was like driving a GTI, but with a much lower sporty seating position. And that stood out to me just because I love the GTI, but if some people don't like, sitting up that high or something like that, obviously that's what stood out to me in our conversation.
Yeah, that is actually something that I like about this car, is that you do sit a lot lower than you do in a regular GTI, and it feels more spacious. It feels wider in the cabin, like more shoulder and hip room, which is pretty nice. In not as much cargo space in rear seat room, though. The spaciousness is restricted just to the front. I would say if somebody was looking for like a cool looking two-door with fairly decent performance all around, the Beetle is a solid car to look at, especially like if you like something like a Mini, but it's too firm and rough, or you like the way a Fiat looks, but you want something that's quicker and better built. The Beetle isn't a bad choice. And it makes me kind of sad that it's out of production now, but admittedly, the only ones that I was really looking at were the earlier versions that had the high output 2-liter and the manual transmission. They discontinued the manual later in the generation.
Sounds good. I went to the reveal of this generation of the Beetle in New York. It was pretty cool, actually. Forget who played, but that's just my little trivia note on this generation, outgoing generation, if you will, past tense of Beetle.
And I was actually on the drive of the final edition down in Mexico.
That's kind of cool, actually. I guess we'll leave it there. No quarantine lockdown notes. I guess it's funny because things are kind of opened. I've been trying a new garlic and olive oil pasta, which is working out pretty good. You can get all the ingredients quite easily, many of them through the mail, so there's that. Yeah, I just got a Prius, which replaced the Land Cruiser, so I'm sort of like,
wow.
Paying back my debt to the environment. So we'll talk about that probably next week on the show. You guys stay safe out there, be well, and thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Autoblog Podcast. We'll see you next time.